Averly walked into her parents' house on Christmas Eve hoping for a calm evening. She had spent the whole day convincing herself that maybe this year would be different, maybe her parents wouldn't compare her to her sister again. But the moment she stepped into the living room, she saw Kenna sitting beside the tree, glowing with confidence. Their parents handed Kenna an envelope first, smiling proudly as she opened it. Kenna's eyes widened, and she announced that it was a $10,000 bonus for being responsible and successful. Everyone clapped, and her parents hugged her like she had won some grand award. Then her mother handed Averly her own envelope. It felt thin, almost empty, but she opened it anyway. Inside was a single typed letter with the title written in bold, a reminder of your failures. Averly's fingers froze as she read the first few lines. Her parents didn't hide anything. They pointed out the jobs she didn't keep, the mistakes she made, and the ways she had fallen behind in life. Every sentence felt like a slap. The room grew quiet, and Kenna looked away awkwardly, pretending to fix her sleeve. Her father stood with his hands behind his back, as if he had done something wise instead of cruel. Averly stayed still, holding the paper while her chest tightened. She felt humiliated sitting there, treated like a burden while her sister was praised like a trophy. Instead of saying anything, she folded the letter and placed it back into the envelope. She looked at each of them, memorizing their faces, not out of love but out of a calm realization. This was the moment she understood she couldn't expect anything from them. She decided right there, quietly, that she would no longer let them define her worth. She would rise, but she would do it without them. Averly had always known her family was like a scoreboard, even if no one admitted it. From a young age, Kenna was the favorite, the one who could do no wrong. Every award, every praise, every compliment seemed to be reserved for her sister. Averly, on the other hand, was always compared, always measured against Kenna's achievements. No matter what she did, it never seemed enough. Their parents celebrated Kenna's grades, her job promotions, and her confidence, often announcing them in front of everyone. Averly's efforts were quietly dismissed or pointed out as almost good enough. If she made a mistake, it became a lesson she was expected to learn quickly, while Kenna's missteps were often ignored. Birthdays, holidays, even casual dinners carried this invisible ranking. Averly learned to speak softly, to move cautiously, always careful not to make a misstep that would be noticed. The envelope on Christmas Eve was not new in its cruelty, it was just the worst. Every letter, every word from their parents seemed like another point on the scoreboard, marking her failures. She had been criticized for leaving jobs, for not following the right path, for not being like Kenna. But before, she had swallowed it, pretending it didn't hurt. This time, it was different. Sitting there, looking at her parents and her sister, Averly felt a sharp clarity. She understood how deep the imbalance ran, how every moment of her life had been overshadowed by Kenna's successes. The pain was real, but beneath it, a quiet anger was growing. She realized she didn't want to play their game anymore. She didn't want to be the benchwarmer who lived in the shadow. Something inside her shifted, and she knew she had to change the rules herself. Averly had worked hard, but no one seemed to notice. While her parents praised Kenna for every success, they ignored the struggles Averly quietly carried. When her mother became sick, Averly took on the responsibility of caring for her, managing appointments, medications, and endless nights of worry. She also helped her father after he lost his job, making sure bills were paid and keeping the household running when things felt like they were falling apart. Because of these responsibilities, Averly had to turn down job offers and delay her own plans. She gave up promotions that required long hours away from home, postponed moving to a bigger city, and even shelved ideas she had for her career. She never complained, never demanded recognition, because she believed family came first. But her parents didn't see it that way. To them, it was just failure, proof that she couldn't handle life the way Kenna could. Meanwhile, Kenna's path was smoother. Their parents paid for her college tuition, helped her rent a nice apartment, and even gave her seed money to start her first business. She never had to worry about money or struggle to make ends meet. Everything was handed to her, and yet she acted as if it was all her own doing. Averly watched silently, the unfairness stinging more every day. Her sacrifices were invisible, her hard work counted for nothing. The more she gave, the less she was valued. And yet, that very struggle had shaped her, taught her resilience, and forced her to learn things Kenna would never understand. Deep down, Averly knew this unfairness could fuel her, could be the reason she would rise higher than anyone expected, even if it meant leaving her parents' world behind forever. After dinner, Averly lingered near the kitchen, pretending to clean up while listening to Kenna talk quietly to her husband, Rhett. "Averly is just too emotional," Kenna said, her voice sharp and full of judgment. "She's not cut out for real success. She always overreacts." Rhett chuckled, nodding in agreement, and their parents laughed along, as if this was all a private joke at her expense. Averly's hands tightened around the dish towel. She felt a chill run through her, a cold clarity replacing the usual hurt and confusion. Every word felt like a confirmation of everything she had suspected all her life, that she would never be seen as enough in their eyes. This wasn't just teasing or a minor insult, it was the culmination of years of being belittled, compared, and dismissed. Without saying a word, Averly set the dish down and turned toward the door. The envelope from earlier lay on the counter, the paper that had carried their judgment and shame. She didn't pick it up. She didn't need to. It had already done its job, reminding her who they thought she was. She walked out of the house, feeling neither anger nor sadness, only a steady, hard resolve. This would be the last Christmas she let them define her worth. She would no longer sit silently, waiting for approval that would never come. For the first time, she felt free to leave behind not just the envelope, but the weight of their judgment, their favoritism, and their unfair comparisons. As she closed the door behind her, the cold winter air hit her face, but it didn't bother her. It felt cleansing. For the first time in years, Averly felt like she was stepping into her own life, on her own terms, leaving behind the family that had never truly seen her. This was the moment everything began to change. Averly moved into a small basement apartment on the edge of town, a quiet space that felt completely her own. The walls were bare, the furniture simple, but it didn't matter. For the first time in years, she had control over her life. She picked up 2 jobs, one at a local cafe and another at a design supply store, working long hours to cover rent and bills, but she didn't mind. Every tired muscle and sore hand felt like progress, like proof that she was building something real for herself. At night, she poured herself into a technical design course she had enrolled in secretly. The class was taught by Ronan Pierce, a retired innovation engineer who had designed products for companies all over the country. Unlike her family, Ronan didn't dismiss her efforts or measure her against anyone else. He saw potential in her ideas, asked her questions that challenged her thinking, and pushed her to explore solutions she never thought she could achieve. Over time, Ronan became more than a teacher. He became a mentor and a partner in her growth. He encouraged her to sketch designs, test materials, and imagine possibilities beyond what she thought was realistic. With his guidance, Averly started creating prototypes in her small apartment, staying up late and experimenting with ideas that blended creativity and practicality. Each day, she felt herself changing. The fear and self-doubt that her family had instilled slowly faded, replaced by confidence and a quiet determination. She no longer sought validation from those who had never truly supported her. Instead, she focused on learning, building, and proving to herself that she was capable of more than anyone, including her parents and sister, had ever allowed her to believe. The small basement became a place of transformation, where Averly quietly began shaping the life she deserved. As Averly continued her course, she discovered something surprising about herself. Designing structures and creating prototypes came naturally, almost as if she had always been waiting for this moment to realize her skills. She found joy in solving problems, turning abstract ideas into workable designs. Each project she completed gave her more confidence, and for the first time, she felt proud of her own work without needing anyone else's approval. Ronan noticed her talent quickly. He encouraged her to take her abilities seriously, telling her that what she was capable of could lead to something meaningful and even profitable. He challenged her to think bigger, to create not just for practice, but for real-world use. Inspired, Averly started sketching a new idea, a modular, space-saving furniture system designed for tiny apartments. The concept was practical, creative, and socially useful, something people could genuinely benefit from in their everyday lives. Ronan, impressed with her dedication and ingenuity, introduced her to Maribel Duran, a small investor who specialized in supporting innovations that helped communities. Maribel listened carefully as Averly explained her concept and immediately saw its potential. She agreed to fund a small prototype, offering guidance on production and market appeal. With this support, Averly threw herself into the project, working late nights and early mornings, refining her designs, and testing materials. She felt a new sense of purpose, a drive she had never experienced when her family judged her. Every completed prototype was proof that her life was moving in a direction of her own making. Her confidence grew with every step, and she realized that the path she had been forced onto by her family's judgment was no longer relevant. Averly was finally creating something that belonged entirely to her, a product born from her talent and determination. Averly's hard work finally began to show results when her modular furniture design was accepted into a mid-sized innovation expo in Minneapolis. She spent weeks preparing, working from early morning until late at night, testing prototypes, refining details, and making sure everything was perfect. Exhaustion often threatened to take over, but she pushed through, driven by the quiet determination she had built over months of struggle. At the expo, her booth attracted attention almost immediately. Visitors were impressed by the practicality and creativity of her design. She explained the concept patiently, demonstrating how each piece could be adapted to different spaces, and watched as people's eyes lit up with understanding. When the judges announced the awards, Averly felt a rush of disbelief and joy. She had won second place. Along with the recognition came funding to produce her furniture on a larger scale and a manufacturing partnership that could turn her ideas into a real business. For the first time, Averly felt the weight of validation that had nothing to do with her family's opinions. People who didn't know her history were recognizing her talent, and it made the quiet pride in her chest swell. Her work started to gain traction in design circles, with small blogs and local designers praising her innovative approach. Through it all, she hadn't reached out to her family. They didn't know where she lived, what she was working on, or how far she had come. And she preferred it that way. For the first time, Averly's achievements existed entirely for herself, free from comparison, judgment, or expectation. The success wasn't just about awards or recognition, it was about proving to herself that she could rise on her own terms, without the approval of anyone who had ever doubted her. While Averly was quietly building her success, trouble began at home. Kenna's boutique, once praised by their parents as a shining example of achievement, started to fall apart. She had expanded too quickly, opening multiple locations without thinking through the costs, and she mismanaged funds she didn't truly understand. The business that had seemed so stable suddenly faced mounting bills, empty shelves, and frustrated customers. Their parents had always assumed Averly would be there to step in, to fix problems quietly and manage crises behind the scenes. They didn't realize that she had chosen to step away, that she had stopped answering calls and stopped being their safety net. Kenna was left to handle everything herself, and she struggled under the weight of expectations she couldn't meet. As the boutique's problems grew, so did the tension at home. Their parents, once confident in Kenna's abilities, began to panic. They tried to give advice, make suggestions, and even pressure her to ask Averly for help, but Averly stayed distant, focusing on her own work and ignoring their pleas. The contrast between the sisters was becoming impossible to ignore. Kenna, once the perfect daughter, was now failing without Averly's quiet support. The family who had humiliated Averly on Christmas Eve was now facing consequences they hadn't anticipated. For the first time, they realized that she had been a part of their lives not because she had failed, but because she had quietly carried the burdens they never acknowledged. It was a hard lesson for them. The same person they had belittled, treated like a disappointment, and compared to her sister was now gone, and they were left scrambling, seeing how much they had relied on her without ever noticing. For Averly, this distance was satisfying in a quiet, unspoken way. Her absence was proof of her strength and independence. A few months later, Averly noticed something strange. Her phone rang more than usual, and emails from her family started appearing in her inbox. It seemed that news of her success had reached them. A regional business magazine had featured her furniture design, praising its innovation and practicality. Her name was finally out in the world, and suddenly, the family who had ignored her struggles was interested again. Kenna was the first to reach out. She sent a polite, almost friendly message, asking if Averly could help restructure her failing boutique. The words were careful, but the intent was clear. Kenna wanted assistance, and she wanted it now. Soon after, their parents began calling, their voices warm and cautious. They spoke of misunderstandings from last Christmas, trying to act as if nothing serious had happened. They mentioned wanting to support her now, as if they had suddenly realized her potential all along. Averly listened quietly to all of it. She read their messages and answered none of them. When she picked up the calls, she stayed calm, neutral, and said only what was necessary. There was no anger in her tone, no emotion to give them a reaction. She had learned long ago that their concern came from convenience, not care, and she refused to feed into their sudden interest. Inside, Averly felt a quiet satisfaction. For years, they had dismissed her, mocked her failures, and ignored her sacrifices. Now, they were seeing what they had missed. But she was no longer theirs to control, no longer the person they could manipulate. She had built a life on her own terms, and for the first time, she felt truly untouchable. The calls and messages didn't tempt her, they only reminded her of how far she had come, and how different her world was from the one they still inhabited. Averly agreed to meet them at a small cafe, choosing a neutral place where no one could claim home advantage. When she arrived, Kenna was already there, looking confident as ever, while their parents tried to appear casual and relaxed. The air was tense, filled with unspoken words and past grudges. They started talking, immediately asking Averly to help Kenna with her failing boutique. Kenna spoke as if she deserved assistance, her tone full of entitlement. Their parents chimed in, trying to make excuses for last Christmas, calling it a misunderstanding and insisting they had only meant well. Averly listened carefully, nodding politely but saying nothing, her calmness hiding the storm inside her. After a pause, she reached into her bag and pulled out the envelope she had kept all this time. Slowly, deliberately, she opened it and began to read the letter aloud. Every word, every line, echoed through the cafe. She read about the failures they had listed, the disappointments they had claimed she caused, and the ways they had judged her life. As she read, she watched their faces change, shock, guilt, and discomfort replacing their earlier confidence. When she finished, Averly looked at each of them calmly. "I will never again sacrifice myself for people who took pleasure in belittling me," she said quietly but firmly. "I forgive you for the past, but I will not be part of your lives anymore." She stood, leaving the letter on the table, and turned toward the door. Her parents tried to speak, but she walked away before they could. For the first time, she felt entirely free of their judgment, free of their expectations, and free of the role they had forced her into for so many years. The confrontation wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was final. Averly had drawn a line, and nothing would make her cross it again. Averly's revenge was quiet, almost invisible to anyone except herself. She didn't shout or confront anyone, she simply kept building her life. Her modular furniture line gained attention from a larger company, and soon they offered to acquire her designs. Averly agreed, and the deal made her the lead designer for their expansion, giving her the resources and recognition she had always deserved. Meanwhile, Kenna's boutique continued to fail. Without Averly's hidden support and guidance, the business collapsed completely. Her parents, who had once praised every one of Kenna's achievements, now scrambled to fix what they could, offering advice and trying to help after the fact. But it was too late. Kenna had overestimated her own abilities, and the structure they had relied on, Averly, was no longer available to them. Despite their attempts to reconnect, Averly stayed distant. She answered their messages politely when necessary but kept her distance, never allowing them back into her life in a meaningful way. She had learned that they were never capable of seeing her value unless it served their own convenience. She no longer needed their approval or their presence to feel complete. The irony was not lost on her. For years, they had thought they could control her, humiliate her, and dismiss her, believing she would always return to fix their problems. But the truth was simple: they didn't lose Averly because she failed. They lost her because they failed her, because they never recognized her worth when it mattered most. Averly's life continued to grow in ways they could no longer influence. Every new success, every recognition, was her silent revenge, a demonstration of her strength and independence. She didn't need to announce it, her life itself spoke louder than any words ever could. A year had passed since that painful Christmas, and now Averly sat in her own apartment, surrounded by soft lights and a small decorated tree. The space felt warm and peaceful, a place where she could finally breathe without fear of judgment or comparison. She looked around and smiled, thinking of how far she had come since that night when her parents had handed her the letter that called her a failure. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a message from Ronan. He wished her a Merry Christmas and congratulated her on winning another design award. Averly read it, feeling a quiet happiness that had nothing to do with her family and everything to do with her own hard work and dedication. She typed a quick reply, thanking him, and set the phone aside. She poured herself a cup of hot chocolate and sat by the window, watching the snow fall gently outside. Each flake seemed peaceful, like the calm she had fought so hard to create in her own life. She thought about the past year, about the silent determination, the long nights, and the sacrifices she had made to build something real. Unlike before, her accomplishments now felt entirely her own. As she sipped her drink, she whispered to herself, "I wasn't the failure. They were." The words felt true in a way that no letter or lecture could ever make them. Averly understood that she had escaped the toxic comparisons, the favoritism, and the belittling that had defined her life for so long. For the first time, Christmas felt like hers. It wasn't about recognition from her family or proving herself to anyone else. It was about her freedom, her strength, and the life she had built from her own efforts. She leaned back, watching the snow and feeling a deep, quiet pride in herself. This was her victory, and it was hers alone.